Jax's revenge domain. I was standing waist-deep in mud when the kid in the $80,000 truck decided my 22 years meant nothing. He didn't just fire me, he destroyed my family's legacy first, then left me stranded in the rain like some piece of broken equipment. What he didn't know was that I held the one thing that could turn his $6.5 million of prime timber into expensive mulch. My name's Roy Donovan, I'm 50 years old, and I've been cutting trees since I got out of the Marines. That morning started like any other on Cascade Ridge, with the smell of diesel and pine needles mixing in the cold air. I was checking the water pressure on our main irrigation line when Spencer Hamilton's pristine white Escalade came bouncing up the logging road like it was afraid of getting dirty. The ridge had been our family's workplace for 3 generations. My grandfather started cutting here in the 1940s, back when they used crosscut saws and mules. My father took over in the 70s and brought in the first mechanical equipment. Now it was my turn, and I'd spent 22 years learning every rock, root, and ravine on this mountain. 8 years in the Corps before that taught me about leadership, but the forest taught me about patience. Spencer Hamilton was the owner's son, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA and ideas about optimizing operational efficiency. He'd been running the show for 3 months since his father Harold had that heart attack, and morale was already circling the drain. The kid treated logging like it was some kind of spreadsheet problem instead of a job where people could die if you cut corners. See, logging isn't just about cutting trees. It's about reading the land, understanding weather patterns, knowing which slopes will hold a fully loaded skidder and which ones will send you sliding into a ravine. It's about crew dynamics and equipment maintenance and 1,000 small decisions that can mean the difference between profit and disaster. Spencer thought his computer models could replace 40 years of collective experience. He was about to learn different. My son Cole was operating the main skidder that day, dragging a massive Douglas fir down to the landing zone. Kid's got good hands, learned from watching me since he was 12. He understands the balance point of a 30-ton machine, knows how to feather the throttle when the ground gets soft. But Spencer didn't see skill. He saw labor costs that needed cutting. I'd been watching Spencer's management style for weeks. He'd already laid off 3 veteran crew members, replacing them with contractors who bid low but didn't know the terrain. 2 weeks ago, one of his new guys nearly took out a power line because he didn't know about the utility easement on the south slope. Last week, another contractor got his equipment stuck so deep we needed 2 skidders to pull him out, tearing up 50 yards of access road in the process. The crew was on edge. These are good men. Sal Moretti has been running heavy equipment for 30 years, knows every bolt and bearing on a Cat 320. Tommy Willis can fell a tree within 6 inches of where you point, even on a 45-degree slope. Joe Martinez runs our maintenance shop and can rebuild an engine with parts from 3 different manufacturers. But Spencer saw them as overhead expenses, not the skilled craftsmen they are. Spencer climbed out of his truck wearing brand new Carhartt gear that still had the tags on it. He walked straight past me to where Cole was maneuvering the log, and I knew something bad was coming. You develop instincts about trouble when you've spent 8 years in the Corps and 22 years in the woods. The way Spencer carried himself, the tight set of his shoulders, the way he kept checking his phone, all signs of a man about to make a decision he thought was clever. "Donovan," Spencer called out, not bothering to look at me. He was staring at his tablet, probably looking at some efficiency report generated by software that had never seen a real forest. "Your boy's taking too long. 45 minutes per load is unacceptable." "It's safe," I said, walking over. "Ground's soft after last week's rain. He pushes too hard. That skidder goes sideways." Cole was working a particularly tricky section where the slope dropped off toward Devil's Creek. One wrong move and 80,000 pounds of machinery would be tumbling down a 60-foot embankment. He was taking his time, checking his footing, making sure the load was balanced. That's what I taught him. That's what my father taught me. Better to take an extra 15 minutes than to spend 3 days hauling a skidder out of a creek bed. Spencer's face got that look rich kids get when someone contradicts them. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed, like he was personally offended that reality didn't match his spreadsheet. "My efficiency models show we can cut turnover time by 35%. Your son either learns to work faster or finds work elsewhere." "Those models account for terrain?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Weather conditions? Equipment capabilities?" "They account for industry standards," Spencer snapped. "This operation is 40% below optimal productivity. That ends today. That's when I should have stepped in harder, but I was still thinking this was just another management phase. Rich kids come and go, but timber work stays the same. I'd seen 3 different managers cycle through in the past decade, each one convinced they could revolutionize an industry that hadn't fundamentally changed since chainsaws replaced crosscut saws. I was wrong. Spencer wasn't just another temporary irritation. He was going to tear apart everything my family had built. Spencer keyed his radio with more force than necessary. "Cole, shut it down. You're done." My son stopped the skidder mid-turn, the massive log still dangling from the grapple. He climbed down slowly, confused, looking between Spencer and me like maybe he'd misunderstood something. "Sir, did I do something wrong?" "You're too slow," Spencer said, flatly, not even looking at Cole. "I can hire 3 contractors for what we're paying you." The words hit like a physical blow. Cole had been working this ridge since he graduated high school. He knew every piece of equipment, every safety protocol, every trick for reading the timber that I'd passed down from my father. Spencer was throwing away 12 years of training and experience because his laptop said productivity was below optimal. "Dad?" Cole looked at me, and I saw 3 generations of Donovan family pride crumble in his eyes. His great-grandfather had started this crew back in 1945. We'd built a reputation for getting the job done right, safely, profitably. Now some kid with an MBA was tossing it aside like yesterday's newspaper. The crew had stopped working to watch. Sal Moretti shut off his chainsaw and pulled off his hearing protection. Tommy Willis stopped limbing the tree he was working on. Even the new contractors Spencer had hired were staring. Nobody fires the foreman's son in front of the whole crew unless they're trying to send a message. "You can't fire him for working safe," I said, my voice getting that edge it gets before things turn physical. It's the same tone I used in Fallujah when some desk jockey tried to tell my squad how to clear a building. "Watch me," Spencer smirked. He was enjoying this, I realized. The power trip, the humiliation, the chance to show everyone who was really in charge. "And since you're clearly part of the problem, you're done too." That stopped me cold. "What? Insubordination? Resistance to modernization? Failure to meet productivity targets? Take your pick." Spencer stepped closer, puffing out his chest like he thought he was intimidating. At 50 years old and 6'2", I've been intimidated by Iraqi insurgents and 300-foot Douglas firs falling the wrong way. A trust fund baby in designer work boots wasn't even registering. But this wasn't about physical confrontation. This was about something deeper, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. Spencer wasn't just firing 2 employees, he was gutting the institutional knowledge that made this operation work. "I've worked here 22 years, I said quietly. "I know every drainage ditch, every soft spot in the road, every easement and regulation. You fire me, you lose all of that." "I have GPS," Spencer scoffed. "I have digital maps and satellite imagery and efficiency algorithms. I don't need your gut feelings or your folklore. I need workers who follow orders." The crew went dead quiet. These men had worked with me for decades. They'd followed my lead through ice storms that snapped power lines and equipment failures that left us stranded for days. They'd seen me pull Sal out of a ravine when a cable snapped in 2018, crawling down a 45-degree slope with a broken winch cable to get him out before hypothermia set in. They'd watched me negotiate with state inspectors and environmental groups and OSHA investigators, protecting their jobs while keeping the operation running clean. Now they stood there in the cold morning air, watching their foreman get fired by a kid who probably couldn't start a chainsaw without reading the manual. "I want your company radio, truck keys, and access cards." "Now," Spencer said, holding out his manicured hand. I looked at Cole, who was staring at his boots like he wanted to disappear into them. I looked at the crew, who couldn't meet my eyes because they had families to feed and mortgages to pay. I didn't blame them for their silence. Jobs are scarce in timber country, especially for men over 40 who've spent their whole lives in the woods. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the radio and keys. The radio was a Motorola XPR7550 that I'd carried for 8 years, programmed with every frequency from the fire department to the environmental monitoring stations. The keys opened every gate, every equipment shed, every safety box on the ridge. I was handing over access to an operation I'd helped build from the ground up. The keys landed in Spencer's palm with a heavy clink. "You're making a mistake, kid." "The only mistake," Spencer said, pocketing the keys, "was keeping dead weight this long. Both of you, walk down to the gate. Our trucks are at base camp. Cole said. That's 4 miles down the mountain. Company policy. Spencer shrugged, and I could see he was enjoying this part. Terminated personnel don't ride in company vehicles, and since you're both fired for cause, you're unauthorized personnel. Enjoy the hike. He turned his back on us and started barking orders at the crew, trying to cover his incompetence with noise and volume. All right, show's over. Get back to work. Tommy, I want you on the skidder. Sal, start limbing that pile by the landing, and somebody call those contractors I hired. We're running 3 crews from now on. That's when I felt the calm settle over me. The same cold clarity I got in Fallujah when things went sideways and you had to think fast or people died. Spencer thought he'd removed a problem, but he'd just created a much bigger one. He'd fired the 2 people who understood the most critical aspect of the operation, something he didn't even know existed. I put my hand on Cole's shoulder. Come on, son, let's take that walk. The walk down Cascade Ridge usually took an hour in a truck. On foot, in work boots not designed for hiking, it was a 3-hour trek through mud and gravel. The access road wound down the mountain in switchbacks, following the natural contours of the ridge. I'd helped survey this road in 1995, marking the trees that needed to come down, calculating the grade to make sure loaded trucks could make it up and down safely. As we walked, Cole was angry, talking about lawsuits and wrongful termination and calling the labor board. But I was doing different math. I was thinking about water. Spencer needed water for his operation. Lots of it. Skidders overheat without constant cooling. Dust control requires irrigation. Systems, equipment needs daily washing to prevent premature wear. The whole operation depended on access to the watershed that fed Cascade Ridge. What Spencer didn't know, what none of the Hamilton family knew, apparently, was that the water rights weren't included when they bought the timber rights in 1975. My grandfather had been smarter than people gave him credit for. When he sold the land, he kept something vital. When we got to my truck, I pulled out my phone and called Maria Santos. She'd been the company accountant for 15 years, handled all the contracts and legal paperwork. More importantly, she was one of the few people who remembered the old filing systems from before everything went digital. If anyone would know about the water rights documentation, it would be Maria. Roy, what happened? Spencer just announced over the radio that you and Cole were terminated for cause. Spencer's learning the difference between authority and leadership, I said. Maria, I need you to pull the water rights documentation for Cascade Ridge. The original filing from 1963. There was a pause. I could hear her typing on her computer. Roy, why would you need... Another pause, longer this time. Oh my God. You found something. Your grandfather was a lot smarter than anyone gave him credit for. When Hamilton Timber bought the logging rights in 1975, they assumed water access was included in the purchase, but it wasn't. The water rights stayed with the Donovan Family Trust. Roy, this is huge. How huge? Every drop of water on that ridge belongs to you. The irrigation systems, the equipment cooling, the dust suppression, it's all running on water you own, and they never got permission. I felt that old Marine planning instinct kick in. When you're pinned down by enemy fire, you don't panic. You assess your resources, identify the enemy's weaknesses, and formulate a response. Spencer had just made the tactical error of engaging an opponent whose capabilities he hadn't bothered to assess. Can you get me copies of the documentation? I'll meet you at Murphy's Diner in an hour. Roy, be careful with this. Water rights law is serious business. We're talking federal violations here. An hour later, Maria slid a manila folder across the diner table. Inside was the original hand-drawn map my grandfather had made in 1963, showing every stream, spring, and watershed boundary on Cascade Ridge. The legal document attached had the official county seal and my grandfather's signature, notarized and filed with the State Water Resources Department. Your grandfather filed this 2 years before he sold the timber rights, Maria explained. He knew Harold's father was interested in buying, but he also knew that whoever owned the land would need water access. So he separated the water rights and kept them in the family trust. I studied the map. My grandfather had been thorough. Every water source on the mountain was documented. Donovan Creek, Little Bear, Spring, the seasonal runoff from the north slope, even the artesian well near the equipment staging area. Spencer's operation was completely dependent on water I controlled. What's the penalty for unauthorized usage? I asked. Maria smiled for the first time all morning. $50,000 per day plus immediate cessation of activity. And Roy, they've been using it illegally for 48 years. The statute of limitations doesn't apply to ongoing violations, so we could theoretically file for back damages. Theoretically, we could bankrupt them, but practically, you just want your jobs back, right? I thought about that for a moment. Cole was sitting across from me, still angry and hurt from the morning's humiliation. This wasn't just about employment. This was about respect, about understanding that some knowledge can't be downloaded from the internet or learned in business school. I want more than our jobs back, I said finally. I want Spencer to understand what he just destroyed. That evening, I drove my personal truck up the Forest Service road that bordered the ridge. The old logging road wasn't much more than 2 dirt tracks with grass growing between them, but it gave me access to the watershed without trespassing on Hamilton land. I could hear Spencer's operation running night shift, trying to make up for the lost productivity from the morning's chaos. The floodlights they'd set up lit the landing zone like a football stadium. I found the main intake valve where the company tapped into Donovan Creek. It was a simple wheel valve, maybe 12 inches in diameter, painted Hamilton timber colors. Completely illegal, but they'd been using it so long nobody questioned it. There was no permit number, no usage meter, no environmental monitoring equipment, just a pipe stuck into my creek with a valve to control the flow. I took photos from every angle, documenting the installation. Then I called Sheriff Wade Parker. Wade and I had served together in Iraq. He knew I didn't make frivolous calls, especially not at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. Roy, you better have a good reason for dragging me up here this late. I showed him the photos and the water rights documentation. Wade studied the papers with a flashlight, whistling low when he got to the usage penalties. Jesus, Roy. This is a federal violation. Theft of natural resources, unauthorized diversion of waterways, violation of environmental protection laws. I could shut them down tonight and arrest whoever authorized this. I need 24 hours first, Wade. Let me handle this the easy way. You sure about that? Because if this goes to court, Spencer Hamilton's looking at serious jail time, not to mention the fines. I'm sure. Sometimes the best victory is the one where your enemy defeats himself. Wade nodded slowly. He understood. We'd seen enough combat to know that the most decisive victories come when the enemy makes a critical error, not when you overwhelm them with force. 24 hours, he said. But if they don't cooperate, I'm coming back with federal marshals. I spent that night planning my approach. This wasn't about revenge exactly. It was about education. Spencer needed to learn that real power doesn't come from a title or a trust fund. It comes from understanding systems, the flow of water, the movement of timber, the loyalty of crews, the complexity of relationships that keep an operation running. He thought he could replace institutional knowledge with efficiency algorithms. He was about to discover that some problems can't be solved by computer models or business school theories. Some problems require the kind of understanding that only comes from decades of experience and respect for the land you're working. The next morning, I drove up to the main gate and parked my truck across the entrance. When Spencer's Escalade arrived with his morning coffee at exactly 7:30 a.m., I was sitting on my tailgate with a thermos and the water rights papers spread out beside me. This was going to be interesting. "What the hell are you doing here?" Spencer yelled, jumping out of his Escalade like his pants were on fire. I held up the water rights documents, reading the fine print, "Son, turns out my family owns something you need." Spencer grabbed the papers and read them, his face going from red to pale in about 10 seconds. His hands were actually shaking when he looked back up at me. "This is fake. We've had water access for 48 years. You've had illegal access for 48 years, I corrected. My grandfather never enforced it because he respected your grandfather. But you fired his son and his grandson. That changes things." "How much?" Spencer asked, his voice cracking. All that Stanford MBA confidence was evaporating pretty quickly. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something about respect," I said, standing up from the tailgate. "See, you think power comes from a title and a trust fund, but real power comes from knowing things other people don't know. Understanding systems that can't be learned from a textbook." I walked over to the main gate and pulled out a large wrench I'd brought from home. The intake valve was about 50 yards inside the property line, but the shutoff valve for the main water line was right at the gate, installed for maintenance purposes. Spencer watched in growing panic as I knelt down and started turning. "What are you doing?" he screamed. "Protecting my property rights," I said calmly. The valve took some muscle. It hadn't been turned in years. But eventually it gave way, and I shut off the water flow to the entire operation. Within 15 minutes, the radio chatter started. Equipment overheating, dust clouds making work impossible, hydraulic systems running hot. The whole operation was grinding to a halt, and Spencer was standing there watching his efficiency models collapse in real time. "Turn it back on," he demanded. "Can't do that. Sheriff Parker's filing federal charges this afternoon for water theft. Unless what? Unless proper management is restored to this operation." For 3 days, I sat at that gate while Spencer's operation fell apart. He tried everything, called lawyers who told him the water rights were bulletproof, called contractors who wouldn't work without proper water access, even tried to bring in water trucks that couldn't make it up the narrow access road fully loaded. By day 2, equipment was breaking down from overheating. By day 3, the crew was in near revolt. Sal Moretti called me personally to say the guys were ready to walk off the job. The timber on the landing deck was starting to check and stain without proper dust suppression. Spencer tried calling his father in the hospital, which apparently resulted in some very colorful language about his son's management abilities. Harold Hamilton had built his company on relationships and reputation. Spencer was destroying both in less than a week. On day 4, a black town car pulled up behind Spencer's Escalade. Out stepped Harold Hamilton himself, 72 years old and walking with a cane, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else than cleaning up his son's mess. "Roy," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you an apology." "Appreciate that, Mr. Hamilton. My son tells me there's been a misunderstanding about water rights and employment decisions." I handed him the complete documentation Maria had compiled. "No misunderstanding. Your boy fired me and Cole without cause, then stole water for 4 days running. Sheriff Parker's ready to file federal charges." Harold read through the papers slowly, his face getting graver with each page. "How much timber have we lost?" "About 2.5 million board feet are starting to stain. If this goes another week, you're looking at total loss on the harvest. Maybe $6.5 million. Jesus Christ," Harold muttered. He turned to Spencer, who'd been standing by his truck like a scolded child. "Give me your keys, all of them. Dad, I can fix this. I just need more time to implement the efficiency protocols." "You're done, son." Harold's voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Get in the car and don't say another word." Harold turned back to me. "What's it going to take to save this operation? Cole and I want our jobs back with a 20% raise and full authority over crew operations. No interference from business school theories. Done. And I want Spencer banned from the property permanently." Harold looked at his son, who was now sitting in the town car looking like his world had ended. "Also done." "One more thing," I said. "When you're ready to retire, I want first option to buy the company." That surprised him. "You serious about that?" "Dead serious. This land means something to my family. Spencer treated it like a commodity to be optimized. It deserves better." 6 months later, Harold had his second heart attack. This one was fatal. His will left the company to Spencer, but Spencer needed cash more than he needed timber rights. He sold to me for $1.2 million, financed against future harvests, and backed by a local bank that understood the operation's value. I renamed it Donovan and Son Sustainable Forestry. Cole came back as operations manager, and we hired back every man Spencer had laid off. Maria left her accounting firm and joined us full-time as CFO. She and I have been seeing each other for 4 months now, taking it slow but steady. Spencer moved to Seattle and got a job with some tech startup that's probably failing by now. Last I heard, he was selling software solutions for supply chain optimization. I hope he's better at that than he was at logging. People ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Spencer. The answer is no. Respect isn't something you inherit with a trust fund. It's something you earn through competence, consistency, and understanding that leadership means serving the people who follow you, not using them. The ridge is quiet again, except for the sound of chainsaws and diesel. Engines doing honest work. Cole's teaching his own son the basics now. Safety first, respect the forest, take care of your crew. 4 generations of Donovans working the same land. And every morning when I check the water pressure on our irrigation lines, I remember that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the biggest or the loudest. Sometimes it's just knowing where the valve is and having the legal right to turn it. Always understand what you bring to the table that no one else can replace, whether it's knowledge, relationships, or legal rights that others forgot existed. The person who holds the keys isn't always the person who holds the real power. Sometimes the janitor knows more about how the building actually works than the CEO who sits on the top floor.